Scott, do you want to pick up?
Well, the inspiration for writing the book grew out of the whole dogma movement that started nearly 10 years ago, and which has clocked up thousands and thousands, 12,000 postings on the discussion list that we have, and we felt there was time to kind of condense some of this fantastic material into a sort of a statement of our present beliefs in terms of where dogma is, what it means, where it's going, and then and demonstrate through a whole host of different practical activities.
Right. So you started by setting up a discussion
thread? It kind of emerged out of an article that I wrote many years ago. Luke responded to. We got in touch. We decided, various other people around the world, looking at kind of low-tech teaching with working with the material that arises out of the conversation with the people in the room. And it was through that this discussion list evolved, and it's, as I say, it's created an enormous community of people, like-minded people around the world.
Right.
And so we decided it was time to put this together into a book.
Okay.
Well, in a way, the interesting thing about writing the book is that the basis of dogma or dogma-style teaching is very simple. You know, it's based on the absolute archetypes of how we learn things, which is you have some learners, you have somebody who knows more than them, who's the teacher, and through conversation, through showing, through sharing, mimicking, people learn to do things better. And so in a sense, the basic model for a dogma lesson, on the face of it, is very simple. A conversation starts, conversation continues, the teacher manages the conversation, helps with kind of low-level interventions, so probably supplying words, reformulating, recasting. And then once the conversation is finished, or once it dies down, then the teacher and the class look at the language that's emerged from the conversation. And you know, at its simplest, it means talking and then talking about the language that's come out of the conversation. But when it came to writing a book, we realised that we actually use, myself and Scott and other teachers who teach this way, use all kinds of strategies at different stages of the lesson. And in a sense, if we were writing a book that was intended to help teachers not only get a grasp of the theory behind it, but also take it into the classroom and use it, that we needed to give them some kind of structure which would help them to kind of learn the processes for themselves, and essentially give them the tools they need to teach this way without our book in their context.
It's a kind of, I suppose the analogy, the obvious analogy is with, you know more about it because you're a musician.
Well, MTV in the 90s started bringing out, well possibly the 80s, brought out a series of concerts which were called Unplugged. There was Neil Young Unplugged, there was a very famous Nirvana Unplugged. And the interesting thing about it actually is not, they weren't all unplugged at all. Some of them got very elaborate, which is always the danger, that you get a lovely basic simple idea and people can't help elaborating.
Right.
And we've been very keen through this book to show that every single activity can be done with minimal materials and is a kind of very
low technology.
Okay, so the keys there are low technology, minimal materials.
Yeah.
So the idea, when you say minimal materials, you mean the materials that a teacher traditionally would bring to class.
Yes.
You're thinking more about pulling those materials from the students, if you like, or the context of the lesson.
More the content and the context from the students.
Right.
This is not to say this is anti-materials, it's simply what we call materials light. It's using fewer materials but perhaps exploiting them more for the kind of purposes that Luke's been describing.
Right.
Well, I'd like to feel, I mean, different people access new ideas in different ways. One of the great things about this book is that there are 3 sections.
Okay.
There's an introduction, which is not very long, but it's very thorough. It's beautifully written, and it's very thorough. You know, it goes through all the context for dogma, all the reasons why we think it's a coherent approach, drawing on research and learning and insight and ideas in many different fields of teaching, not all of them ELT.
Right.
So there's an introduction. Not everybody will read an introduction all the way through the first time they pick up a book.
Sure.
Some people want to go straight into the classroom, try out an activity. There are lots and lots of activities they can try. It's organised so that the activities are in sections and there's an introduction to each section. So if somebody dives straight into an activity, finds they like it, finds it works, they can immediately go back a couple of pages and get some more ideas in the sense of where it fits into the overall approach.
And is that the third section of the
That's
book?
the second section.
The second section.
There's the intro, the activities, and then Scott will tell you about
The third section then is looking at the application of dogma in different kinds of contexts. So, for example, how would this apply if you were teaching one-to-one? How would it apply if you're teaching young learners? How would it apply if you were teaching business English, for example?
Or exam classes?
Or exactly, an exam classes. So we've tried to sort of broaden the scope a little bit there and look at, and these are very interesting questions to deal with. And I think that often when we're asked, when we do workshops, we say that's all very well, but how would this apply to young learners, for example?
Exactly. And
we attempt to address those issues.
Are there practical activities that are associated to the?
There are strategies that are identified for the different contexts.
For the different contexts.
And that would be another entry point. So if somebody's looking at it thinking this looks interesting, but can I do this with exam classes? They might dive right in towards the end of the book. I mean, the message obviously, the message in almost every case is yes, we can, you can, try it out. I mean, there's one case which would be English for aviation, where in a rare humorous moment we've said that we wouldn't be wanting to wait for language to emerge, 5 miles high. So obviously there are areas of English for very specific purposes where a lexical syllabus in particular makes perfect sense, and you'd be crazy not to teach it.
Right.
But in almost all the contexts that have been raised over the 9 years of discussion forum, people have found, not us saying, yeah, we think that'll work, people have told us it works in their context, and so we've drawn on those contributions in writing the final section.
Right.
Very insistent that this is not a method. It's not a kind of, you have to buy the whole package, not at all. And in fact, again, what's emerged out of the discussion on the internet is that people talking about ways that they would absorb dogma techniques and strategies into more conventional lessons, or working alongside the use of course books or technology, or even applying dogma in an online kind of situation. So it's more, I suppose, a way of thinking about teaching rather than actually necessarily a way of doing teaching.
Right.
And that's again what we've tried to get across in this book. These activities are offered as a kind of menu of possible ways and strategies and techniques of applying this kind of philosophy, but it's the philosophy that you need to, in a sense, internalise first before you're ever going to make these activities work.
Right.
And I think that the likelihood is that people will kind of adopt it to a greater or lesser extent, depending on how well it works for them, how well it goes down with the learners, and what teaching context they're in. So I mean, I think certainly if people take the philosophy on board and they're in a context where it really resonates, then there's a great deal of teaching you can do using this approach.
Right, and it's a very student-centered.
It's not just student-centered; it's student-generated. It takes it a step further. Not another book. Just going back to your first question, in a way, what inspired you to write the book? I think what Scott just said shows that books can really inspire people. And in a sense, the kind of new ideas throughout the history of modern ELT have kind of been carried in books. Some of them have been carried in course books, some of them have been carried in resource books, some of them in teacher development books of a different kind. But it just felt that our belief in dogma in a way that it developed over the last 9 years was strong enough for us to think that it deserved its own book, and that hopefully that will inspire teachers to feel the same.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Lovely to talk to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Go and sell lots of books.